But yeah, thank you everyone for coming to the GIS Association's Mappy Hour. I'm Melissa Albino Hegeman, and I'm the chair of the association's Professional Development Committee. We're recording this, and it will be available on the association's YouTube channel in probably a couple weeks. So if you could save your questions till the end and use the Q&A feature, um, we can get started. And I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight, Ayanthi, and she is a senior data analyst at 1-800-Flowers and has 8 years of experience working with data and transportation for the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission, as well as the New York City Department of Transportation. Ayanthi has analyzed extensive trip and vehicle data sets that inform public policy. She's also analyzed car crash data for research reports for the Vision Zero Geographies program in New York City and to inform safety project construction and prioritization. And frustrated with the lack of available ArcMap licenses, something we can probably all relate to, she has learned how to utilize R, her knowledge of R, to make various geospatial projects happen without some enterprise licenses. So I'm very excited. We're normally very Esri focused, so it's great to have something that's a little bit different. She has a master's in city planning from Rutgers and a bachelor's from Emory. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ayanthi. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Really appreciate it. Now, let me make sure. All right, can everyone see the presentation?
Yes, that looks great.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so thank you, Melissa, for introducing me. I'm super excited to give this talk. I met Melissa at the New York R conference, and we bonded over my talk. I didn't expect to see any other GIS people there. So thanks again. Just a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about today. Just a little bit about me, what R is, why you should or shouldn't use it for GIS work, what the R environment looks like. And I'm going to give a short sample of writing code from start to finish to make a simple map, some map examples, and some resources you can use moving forward. So Melissa already did a very comprehensive introduction to me, but just, who am I and what gives me the authority to tell people about GIS stuff. So I have a master's in city planning, and as Melissa said, I spent 8 years working at the intersection, pun intended, of transportation and data at two different New York City agencies, the Taxi and Limousine Commission and the Department of Transportation. I'm taking a little bit of break from city planning and GIS, but I still really love working with geospatial data and maps. And I'd like to use this time to also say that I am on the board of the New York City chapter of R Ladies. We work to get women involved in using the programming language R and careers in data in general. And also I have this map up here. One of the reasons I am interested in maps in general is because my parents are from a country that is frequently left off maps, and that country is called Sri Lanka. There's actually a subreddit called Maps Without Sri Lanka because that's how often Sri Lanka is left off maps. So what is R anyway? R is an open source programming language similar to Python. It's object-oriented, and it's primarily used in academic and STEM disciplines for statistical research. That's what R was built for. But it also has strong data visualization capabilities, and over time, more and more people have contributed to the open source R project. So you can do advanced data visualizations, create dynamic applications. So it's really a robust programming language with a lot of tools. And its use has expanded even more over time as data analytics and data science has become more popular. So why should you use R for GIS work? Well, number one, it's free. It's kind of hard to get an ArcMap license at home to practice mapping with. So I wanted to do projects on my own time. It was either QGIS or R, and I had a lot more fun working with R. R handles large data sets extremely well. When I was at the Taxi and Limousine Commission, we were at the time, and I'm sure they get even more data now, we were getting close to 1 million rows a day. So working with that in Esri was really just not possible. R does a lot of quick data manipulation from built-in functions. You know, you don't have to do all the point and click that you do in ArcMap for using the extensions. And when you have this written code, to go back to the point and click part, it's much more reproducible. You can run 10 lines of code instead of trying to remember the 50 clicks you did to get all the color and statistics bins for your map. And there's better availability of more complex geospatial functions and algorithms. You don't have to pay for the extensions that you would in ArcMap. A lot of that is available for free in certain R packages. And then once you get more advanced with R, you can use it for task automation. So if there's a map or a process that you want to run monthly, you can set it so that, you know, the second Tuesday of the month at 9 a.m., it runs on your computer. So that's very useful. Now, R is not a perfect substitute for something like ArcMap. There are things you just really can't do well in R that you can do in ArcMap or QGIS or any dedicated GIS software. So one of the things I found is that custom color palettes can be really time consuming to create. I'm sure a lot of people in here have made land use maps before. And, you know, when you have all the different colors for all these different classifications, trying to figure out the hex color codes in R, running it to make sure to see what the color looks like, that's much harder to me than seeing all the colors in front of you in ArcMap and picking, okay, dark yellow, medium yellow, light yellow for residential. So the placement of map elements can also be hard and a bit manual in R. You know, the default, you know, will center or justify things, and you can do like centered left or right. But if you want to move the legend, you know, a couple inches to the right, you kind of have to pick the exact XY coordinates. And there are some packages that make that a little easier to find the right spot, but it's much more annoying than clicking and pointing and dragging that item. Then, of course, there's the learning curve of using R, but fear not, because I don't have any math or statistical programming background, and I have never taken an R class. I've done like a couple of random classes after I started using R, but I learned it all on the job. And I'm certainly not a math whiz, so it's definitely possible to learn if you have no experience. And lastly, it's hard and not possible in some cases to edit a shapefile if it's broken in R. It's quite challenging in some cases, not possible to fix things like overlapping polygons or lines that cross over themselves in R. So if it's a broken shapefile, R is really not the tool to edit it. So this on the screen is the R environment. So in the upper left, you'll see this source panel. That's where you write all your code. The upper right is called the console. And when you run your code, you'll see a bunch of text popping up at the console. Will basically show the code that's been run, and it'll show if it's run successfully, or it'll generate an error message if you made a mistake. And it's on you to debug that error message and see, you know, did I miss a comma or something, or what's wrong with my code? Then the bottom left is the files and viewers panel. Right now, what's up there is just the files in my working directory, but most users use the viewer tab because when you generate a visualization, that's where it'll pop up. And then bottom right, you have the environment. So that's where whenever you create a variable, or in plainer language, you know, when you pull in a shapefile into the R environment, it will show up in the environment tab. And this program that I'm using to run R code is called RStudio. 90% of people who use R, I would say, use RStudio. And also when I say environment, I just realized it's probably not clear to a lot of people. So when you pull in a shapefile into R, it's in the R working environment. It's effectively a copy of that file. So when you're editing a shapefile in R, you're not editing the source file. You're editing that copy in the R environment. And if you want, you can export that edited copy back as a shapefile. And that's also another pro of using R. You can edit things in this virtual environment, and it's not a big deal if you make a mistake. So this is the R environment in action. I just took a quick video. I wrote a bunch of lines of code to create a map. Let me just So all this code, you'll see it's popping up in the console. And I ran that code. It took, what, 5 seconds, and it generated this map. And you can see in the environment that I have the New York City boroughs and parks properties listed there. And a bit later on, I'm going to go step by step through this code to show you what each step does and the kind of exploratory data analysis you would do to get to this point. But I just wanted to show you what it looks like when everything's run and all these panes are populated. Why is it showing it again? Okay. And you may have heard me say that R uses packages. So what a package is, it's just a selection of functions in R, that functions or commands that you use to manipulate the data. So each package has different sets of functions. I've listed here the packages for manipulating spatial data. The ones in the column on the left are the ones that I primarily use, and the ones on the right are ones I'm familiar with but don't use as much. I would say about 60 to 75% of the work you do in manipulating spatial data will be using the SF package and the ggplot2 package. I don't have time, obviously, to go into all these, but I wanted to give you a brief overview of what's out there. So now I'm going to go through an example of writing code from start to finish to show you what the steps are in this process of pulling in data, manipulating it, and making a map. So working with data in R, I mentioned the packages just now. It's used to pull in and manipulate the data. And also, as I said before, you're working in this copy. So you'll see here, I have 2 packages loaded, SF, which is a spatial package, and dplyr, which is used in data manipulation. So the first thing you do whenever you're writing R code is to set your working directory. So this is just where my shape files are stored. And I made it a point here to use a shapefile and a CSV with geometry because R works very well with both. So I pulled in the New York City boroughs shapefile, and that function stread is from the SF package. And to pull in the parks properties, that was a CSV. So the CSV is called parks properties. I pulled it in. I basically concatenated that file path and the file name so that the computer knows where it is. And this st as SF function on the line below takes the multi-polygon column in that file and uses it to convert the CSV to a spatial object. So now in my environment, I'll have 2 files that are spatial, the boroughs and the parks properties. Now, one thing myself, and I'm certainly sure all of us do when we first get a data set, is to do a bit of exploratory analysis. And this is very easy in R. My way of doing it is that I use the call names function to see all the column names. So you can see here call names for parks properties. There's 35 columns. So I wanted to, instead of just clicking through all of them, it's much easier to just do this. And then I pulled up the parks properties in a separate tab. And it's cool. You can toggle between your data set and your code pretty easily. And I can just go through and see a preview of what this data looks like, the column name and what's in there, because I know its location, but I look at this and I'm saying, okay, it's not an exact address, it's the cross streets. So just getting a better look at the data is quite easy. And another thing, for the purposes of this, I knew I had the parks properties data that I was overlaying on the boroughs data set. So I said, okay, like if I want to map these parks properties, what exactly are the categories of parks properties? I'd taken a look at those column names. And the simple xtab command, which is a dplyr, I think it's actually a base R function. You don't technically need a package for it, but it'll give you a crosstab of 1 or more categories. So what I did is to make it into the nice table format here, I used the library data table, and I converted this crosstab into a data table. So this 1 line of code gives me this nice tally. And you can click on this arrow on the top to sort by whichever column you want. So I sorted by the count of values descending. So the most common type of parks properties is Triangle Plaza, and you have all these other categories here. So I did this for a bunch of the different columns when I decided how to make this map, but it's a pretty easy way to go about seeing what the data looks like. One thing I really like to do also that I don't think you can do in, it's a bit choppier in ArcMap. You can obviously pan and look at the data, but you can visualize interactively in R as well. So this one line of code, this map view parks properties Z call type category, this Z call just is what shows up here, the category you want to sort by. So this one line of code generates this interactive map. And I put together a little video that should just show you, it's just me panning around and showing you what you can do. So I'm zooming in. And if I want to take a look at some of these properties, I can mouse over and there will be a little pop-up. But if I want a better look, I can click it and you can see there's all the columns that we saw before are present in the pop-up. Because, you know, if it's a community park or a flagship park, but I want a better idea of what that is, I can go into this map and click on those values and say, okay, that's what, like Parkway, for example, I couldn't tell just by looking at it, like the green pit space on Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn is a parkway, it's a parks managed space. And you can also change the geospatial tiles in the back. I always just use CartoDB Positron because it's simpler. I find all the other ones a bit overwhelming, but I wanted to show you just how you can toggle between all of them. Okay, so now that we've done all this exploratory analysis, I decided, you know, what am I going to plot on this map? What do I think would be fun and interesting to look at on a static map? So what I did, I thought, you know, what are the park zone spaces that if I were going to say, like, let's meet up here to hang out with my friends, we want to be outside, where would we go? So what I did was I removed the park's property types that I didn't think I would really want to use. So parkway, lot, undeveloped, cemetery, those sites I omitted from the data. So that they won't be on the map. And this in function basically means that the in function combined with this exclamation point, it means you're basically selecting rows that do not have these values. So it's excluding everything in this list over here. And the ggplot package I mentioned before, that's what we use to create the map. So I think this looks like a lot at first glance, but it's much simpler than you think. These two are to just pull in the boroughs and parks data. And this fill type category means that the color gradient is going to be based on the description of these parcels. This is just formatting so there's no default gray background, removing the datum grid lines, the title, and just making sure everything's centered. You can add a caption to the map. And this is selecting the color palette that I want to use. So this is the final map that I created. And this is all done in R. Very minimal basically no point and click unless you count the map view browsing. So for me, like, would I put this specific map in a report? Probably not, but I think it's a good starting point. Like for me, what popped out is like Staten Island has a ton of nature areas. The Bronx has a lot of flagship parks. And, you know, just like getting a better idea of what this data looks like and how I might hammer it down even more. I didn't want to get too in depth there today, but, you know, you could take this and go do whatever you want with it. So that was one where I did the code walkthrough. And now I'm going to show you some maps that other maps that have been made in R, some by me, some by other people. So these are two maps that I made almost 2 years ago now. I was interested in the open restaurant permits data set, you know, during post-COVID, whatever period you want to call it now. But the one on the left, the blue and green, is very much explored. This was just my exploratory, okay, if I do this gradient and I look at restaurants per square mile, what does it look like? And this to me wasn't that useful because I said, what's going on here? It looks like this one neighborhood has all the restaurants and everything else is dead. So I put it into quintile buckets, and this gave me a bit of a different picture, but I think this is a good example how you can play around and the map can show two very different stories. And ideally, I would take this sort of breakdown even further to make it tell a bit of a better story, because this doesn't tell much and this still saturates Manhattan a lot. This guy, his name is Milos Popovich. I found him on, I don't know if we're calling it Twitter or X or what, but whatever you want to call that website. But I followed him because he was creating all these beautiful map visualizations in R. So this was created using the OpenStreetMap dataset, which you can pull in directly in R. There's an OpenStreetMap R package. And this is just a really beautiful map of European railways. So also, I didn't get to go into too much detail, but there's a lot of other styling options in R, like this kind of glowing map. I don't think is as easy to make an arc map for QGIS. So if you don't want to make, if you're going beyond the like boring, this needs to go in a report maps, R is very good at making these aesthetically pleasing maps. Oh, too fast. My jaw dropped when I saw this. I like didn't believe this was made in R. I found it on Twitter/X as well. I actually tried to recreate this map on my own computer, but it just wasn't powerful enough to pull in all the raster elevation data. But this is just very visually, this is such a visually stunning high resolution map. I was really blown away that you could do this in R with not too much code, really. The biggest part is that it takes a lot of time to pull in the elevation data because the file is so big. So these are two dynamic maps I made. I don't know if people here are familiar with the GTFS data set that transit agencies put out, but it's basically the transit schedules for all public transit/mass transit systems. So it gives the departure and arrival times for all the stations. So what I did was I did a bunch of data manipulation in R to animate these points. And I created, this is rush hour on New Jersey Transit and the New York City subway, assuming everything is running on time, LOL. But assuming everything is running on time, this is what a rush hour looks like. You can see Staten Island's a little bit slower. I think the red lines are probably the fastest or have the highest, smallest headways, but it's most number of trains. And some useful resources if you want to get a little bit more into using R to make maps. So there are two books. How to Lie with Maps is not R specific, but I found it really great for thinking about map making outside of city government. Because, at DOT, I was just sort of making crash maps, land use maps, things like that. There's not a whole bunch of science or nuance behind it, but I think when you get a little more detailed, having a book like this is very helpful. The book Geocomputation R is like the starting, I would say it's the starting place if you're using R for geospatial work. All three of these authors contribute a lot to the R geospatial ecosystem, and the book is completely free online, and they're constantly updating it too. And these are just a bunch of geospatial professionals I follow on LinkedIn and or Twitter. Some of them are not on Twitter, I don't think. But like I showed you Milos's map. He has a bunch of great tutorials on R. Kyle Walker is someone I've started to recently follow me because he does a ton of work with census data and is good at finding shortcuts. Yeah, these are all great people to follow on whatever social media platform you're on. And that's all I have for today. Later tonight, I'm going to put my slides and the code that I put in this presentation on my GitHub page. For those who aren't familiar with GitHub, GitHub's a website where people share their code and you can download it for your own use. But that's all I had for today. I hope this was useful to some people, to you guys. If nothing else, sparks a bit of an interest. And I believe ArcMap now has a process for integrating R into ArcMap itself. So if you ever wanted to look at that, you can always do that.
Thank you. This has been great. I am a heavy R user, but I've never really tried doing any of that in any of the mapping in R, only data analysis. So this has been really enlightening and so fast compared to some other workflows. So we have time for some questions. If people, they could put them in the Q&A option at the bottom. Also, if anyone would like to, we can take you off mute if you wanted to ask the question in person rather than through the Q&A. So you were a GIS person first before you learned R?
Yeah, so I learned
Mhm.
GIS in grad school because my grad school degree is in city planning, so that was all ArcMap. And I learned R on the job at the Taxi and Limousine Commission. I was their one of not the first, but one of their first data analysts. And they said, you don't need to know any data analytics, like programming languages, but you just need to be willing to learn. So I learned on the job along with the other 3 or 4 analysts, and that's how I got into R.
All right, we've got some questions coming up. Here we've got one from Mark. And it's what did you use to create the dynamic map of mass transit? Was it the MoveViz package?
It was not MoveViz. Let me actually, since I'm on my personal computer, let me see if I actually have that. Uh, I think I have that R code handy. I'm just going to. Here we go. Okay, let me open this and actually see which package I use. Because I used a bunch for this, so it's hard to remember which. Um, I used GG Animate. Um, I used GG Animate, ggplot2, transformr, and GTFS to GPS. Those were like the main things for the animation part.
Great. We also have a question from John, who asked, what statistical analysis capabilities does R provide that ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro can't easily provide? I think that's a big question. I think there's a lot.
Hang on a second.
Yeah.
Which one is that? John, you said?
John, yeah.
Yeah.
John Creighton, the first
Okay.
one. Yeah.
Struggled a bit in terms of quick exploratory mapping that's possible in desktop dimensions and frustrating using desktop.
Oh,
Um,
that's the other John.
oh, there's
There's
two
two
Johns
Johns in
here.
there. Yeah.
Oh. And what statistical analysis does R provide that ArcMap, ArcGIS Pro can't easily provide? Um, Off the top, I haven't used ArcMap in a while now, but there was like stuff like Voronoi polygons you can generate very quickly in R. A lot of the space-time interpolation, like Moranzi and stuff, is very quick. It's, in my opinion, from what I remember, quicker in R than it is in ArcMap. So it's not that you can't necessarily do it in ArcMap, but it's quicker. And I'm blanking on, what is it, the spatial analyst extension? Whatever one of the extensions are in
Hmm.
ArcMap. Like one of the ones you have
Right.
to pay for. Some of those algorithms are available for free in R, but I haven't used those in a long time, so I don't remember off the top of my head.
Let's see. So the question from Joseph, you mentioned using ArcMap, and I think he's referring to you mentioned the ArcMap ArcGIS bridge, and if that's available in a Pro or not.
I think it's available in both.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's a built-in function, yeah.
Okay. All right, now we have the question from the other John.
Other John.
Yes. So he agrees that one of the best aspects of R is the reproducibility, but he struggled in terms of the quick exploratory mapping that is easier in that graphical interface of desktop GIS. Um, do you have any further tips when to help people decide when desktop GIS versus R might be easier?
Um, so let's see. I think if the file is really big, in my experience, I have crashed ArcMap a fair number of times trying to bring in a really big shapefile. So I would say if the file is fairly big, then I would bring it into R. Um, Also, I think it depends on how familiar you are with the data set too. Like if it's a data set you use all the time and you know the column names and stuff, you can pull it into R and your exploratory analysis is already cut in half because you're like, okay, I know what this column means. I can quickly manipulate it now
Mhm.
and go on with the exploratory analysis. But I think if you're less familiar, pulling it in to um, it might be more helpful to pull it in ArcMap.
That makes sense. Thanks. All right, so one more question. Let's see, can you use R to publish maps on the web, or does it just return the maps as files? And can it
No,
return all of the typical
you
GIS
can
files?
absolutely I am glad you asked this question. So because I did a project a while ago where I created a map of all the bubble tea places in New York City. So R has an interface called R Shiny. Um, so the structure of that code is a little bit different, but you can use that to publish web maps. So it's a little, I haven't updated this in a little while, but I will put it in the chat in case people want to see my bubble tea map that I made with R. Can it return all the typical GIS file types? Yeah, you can write out shapefiles using R. You can pull in and write out shapefiles in R.
We have a few more minutes, so if there's any other questions, please do drop them in the question and answer. Um,
Does R
Thank you
support?
again, Ayanthi, for joining us tonight. This has been a really great presentation. Um, oh, we do have one more question here. If asking if R supports geodatabases.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, so thank you for for coming tonight. This has been great. It's been really enlightening to see all the stuff that you can do with R as opposed to just using the traditional desktop GIS. Um, I have a few things to plug for the GIS Association before we end the call, but I don't know if there's anything you wanted to mention. You mentioned you were on the board of Our Ladies, if you wanted to tell people about that.
Yeah, sure. I'll thank you for giving me a chance to plug that. For all the women in here, it's a great group of people. Men are not excluded from coming to our meetups,
Mhm.
just there's an understanding that it's a space primarily for women. Um, but we try and have events once a month, if not more. Um, and it's just a great way to meet people, network. We host workshops, social events. We have a quarterly book club, so it's a lot of fun, and I highly recommend if you're a woman in the area. You don't have to live in New York as long as you're in the area. Like we have people who come from New Jersey. I think one or two even come from Connecticut who might commute. So yeah, if you look us up on Meetup, and then there's ourladiesnyc.org. If you want to check out our website, I could drop that in the chat.
Yeah. Yeah, Our Ladies is a great organization. I've attended a few of your events since I'm a downstater and so helpful and so welcoming. Um, I was just at an R conference actually last week, and so many people mentioned how welcoming R is compared to some other languages. So if you're on the fence about learning, this is the one to try first.
Yeah, and you don't need to know, like, you don't have to be good at R to come to our events. We have plenty of
Mhm.
beginners, intermediate, advanced. That doesn't matter.
Mhm. Well, I'll make sure all the links are in the YouTube video when it gets posted as well. And if there's no other questions, we can wrap things up. Thanks again, Ayanthi. This was really great presentation. Thank you.
Awesome. I hope you guys get something out of it, and I hope you enjoyed it. And thanks so much for inviting me. I was really honored when you asked me at the conference.
right. Have a great night, everyone.